Kong did not sleep that night. He sat in the study with the lamp on and the scotch still untouched, and the file Park had left on the desk. The confirmed intelligence on Park Sung-yi, assembled in the hours after Yuna's departure, while the estate ran on lockdown protocols, and Minnie slept with his crayons stacked on the desk, and Jessica lay in the small bed with the string lights off, not sleeping either, listening to the house settle around her the way she had listened to it settle for 4 years. Park Sung-yi, 31 years old, second son of Park Min-chul, head of the Park Syndicate. His mother was Han Soo-jin, formerly Han Soo-jin Park, before she became Han Soo-jin Kong by her second marriage to Kong's uncle, who had died of a cardiac event 6 years ago and left no children of his own. Park Sung-yi had been raised in his father's household after the divorce. He had climbed his father's organization not through inheritance, but through demonstrated capacity, intelligence work, pressure operations, the specific kind of ruthlessness that gets noticed in organizations built on ruthlessness. He had been operational within the syndicate's inner circle for 4 years. The same 4 years Kong had been building the protection architecture around a woman and a child he did not know were his. The parallel was not lost on Kong. He sat with the file and the lamp and the cooling night, and he looked at the photograph of a man who shared, however distantly, however technically, the blood of the uncle Kong had buried 6 years ago, and he thought about what Jessica had asked him. Not what he planned to do, what he wanted the outcome to be. He had never been asked that question about a decision like this before. The outcome he planned and the outcome he wanted had always been the same thing. The ruthlessness that Park Sung-yi had climbed his father's organization by demonstrating, Kong had built his own empire on the same quality. The difference was that Kong was better at it, had always been better at it. The resolution of a threat like this one had always been total, methodical, and without complexity, but Minnie was in a room down the hall, and Jessica had said come back. And somewhere in the arithmetic of those two facts and a file folder with a man's photograph in it, the calculation Kong had been running his entire adult life was producing a different answer than it ever had before. He closed the file at 4 in the morning. He went upstairs. He did not go to the study. He did not go to the operations room. He went to the secured wing corridor, and he sat down with his back against the wall beside the almost closed door, and he listened to the quiet inside it. The specific silence of 2 people not sleeping in the same room, both of them aware of the other's wakefulness. And he sat there until the first gray light of morning began at the high window at the corridor's end. Then he knocked. Jessica opened the door immediately. She had been sitting in the chair by the desk, her book unread in her lap, the string lights on their lowest setting. She looked at him, at the hair that had not been smoothed since the previous afternoon, at the open collar, at the tattoos on his hands that she could now read as she could read everything else about him, the history written in them, and she stepped back from the door. He came in. He sat on the edge of the desk. She sat back in the chair. Across the room, Minnie slept in the profound, unconscious way that children sleep when the adults around them have stayed awake on their behalf. His name is Park Sung-yi, Kong said. Not quietly enough that it wasn't heard, but quietly enough that it belonged to the room and not the rest of the house. He's Park Min-chul's son. His mother was my uncle's second wife. Jessica absorbed this. She looked at her hands in her lap, then back at him. How close? Technically, by marriage. My uncle died 6 years ago. They were married for 9 years before that. He looked at Minnie's sleeping face. I never met the boy. My uncle's first family and his second were never brought together. I didn't know the name. I didn't know he existed until last night. Jessica was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is active rather than absent, thinking happening, something being organized. She had done this kind of thinking for 4 years, the specific analysis of a situation from every angle before settling on the one that mattered. What does he know about you? Knows I'm his stepfather's nephew. He would have known that before he authorized the strike. He knew exactly what he was doing. So he wasn't acting out of ignorance, she said. He knew who Minnie was to you, and he still ordered it. Ordered it before I confirmed Minnie publicly. He was acting on Yuna's intelligence about the clinic. He knew the boy existed, and he understood the connection, which means he understood the leverage. He wasn't trying to kill Minnie. The words sat in the room between them like something that needed to be handled carefully. He was trying to demonstrate capability, to show me he could reach him. Demonstration, Jessica said. Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened in her lap. He endangered my son to send you a message. She looked at him. In the low amber light of the room, with Minnie asleep behind her and the morning barely beginning at the corridor window, She looked at Kong with the complete focus of a woman who had spent 4 years reading environments for the location of the exit and had decided, sometime in the last 11 days, to stop looking for one. "What do you want the outcome to be?" she said. The same question from the night before, asked again with the same precision. "Not what you're going to do. What do you want?" Kong looked at his son's sleeping face, the round cheeks, the tight coils, the small chest rising and falling with the complete indifference of the deeply asleep. "I want him safe," he said. "Permanently, not managed, not monitored, safe. I want you both to be able to walk out of this estate without a security protocol attached to every movement. I want Minnie to go to school without a team following him. I want—" He stopped. He looked at her. "I want what happened yesterday on that road to be the last time either of you is in a vehicle that takes gunfire. That's what I want." Jessica looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Then you need to talk to him." "Intend to?" "Like that," she said. "Not as his enemy, as his family. However technical, however distant, you are the closest thing he has to family on his stepfather's side. That matters in this world. You know it does." She watched his face. "A war you win by violence solves the problem of Park Sung-yi. It doesn't solve the problem of the organization that raised him, or his father, or the dozen other pressure points your enemies will find once they understand what Minnie means to you. But a conversation, a real one, between two people who share blood by marriage and have both just discovered they've been working against each other without knowing the connection." She paused. "That could solve more than a war." Kong looked at her. "You're asking me to negotiate with the man who ordered the attack on our son. Son." The words arrived between them without either of them having planned them, and neither of them acknowledged it, and both of them heard it, and that was enough. "I'm asking you to be smarter than what he did," she said. "I'm asking you to be the kind of man our son can learn from, not just the kind his enemies are afraid of." The room was very quiet. Minnie made a small sound in his sleep, the near-waking sound of a child whose body is beginning to remember morning, and both of them went still. Kong stood. He straightened the throw over Minnie's shoulder with one tattooed hand, careful, unhurried, the gesture he had absorbed from watching Jessica do it for 11 days, and then he looked at her. "Talk to him," she said again. Soft, not an instruction. The voice she used when she was offering him something rather than directing him toward it. "Yes," he said. He left. She told him to be smarter than what was done to them. She told him to be the kind of man their son could learn from. And for the first time in his life, Kong Seung-il is listening to someone other than his own empire. Stay with this story, because what comes next changes everything. The letter from Park Sung-yi arrived at the estate gate at 9 that morning. Not a message through intermediaries, not a communication through the syndicate's usual channels. A physical letter, handwritten, delivered by a single messenger who stood at the gate without a weapon, and waited to be searched and accepted the search without protest, and left without speaking. Park brought it to Kong in the operations room where Kong was standing over the tactical map. The same map, the same positions. The familiar architecture of a conflict he had been preparing to execute with the cold efficiency of 11 years of similar decisions. He looked at the envelope. He opened it. The letter was brief. 8 sentences. Kong read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set it on the map and looked at it the way you look at something that has arrived from an unexpected direction and requires you to recalibrate the entire geometry of your response. "What does it say?" Park asked. Kong looked up. "He wants to meet, privately. No seconds, no security, no weapons. He names a location, a tea house in Bukshan that his family has used for private meetings for 30 years. He paused. "He says his father doesn't know about yesterday. He says the decision was his alone and he'll carry it alone. And he says—" Kong looked at the letter again, at the specific sentence that had made him read the thing twice. "He says he didn't know about the boy until 3 weeks ago. He says if he had known, he would not have moved on the clinic." Park was quiet for a moment. "You believe that?" "Don't know what I believe yet," Kong said. "I know that a man who wanted escalation doesn't write a letter. A man who wanted to finish what he started yesterday doesn't send a single unarmed messenger." He looked at the map. The red markers that indicated Park syndicate positions. The blue markers that indicated his own. All of it suddenly less certain than it had been 12 hours ago. He's his father's son. His father built an organization on the principle that wars are won in rooms before they're fought in streets. "You're considering walking into his room." Kong picked up the letter. He folded it once along its original crease. "Book the tea house," he said. "Confirm to his messenger. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. I'll be there." Park looked at him for a long moment. 9 years of reading Kong's face, and the face looking back at him now was one he had not seen in 9 years. "She talked to you," Park said, "not a question." "She always talks to me," Kong said. I'm only now learning to hear it. Park turned to go. He stopped at the doorway. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I think she's right. He paused. I think she's been right about most things for 4 years. I just didn't have the authority to say so. He left. Kong stood alone in the operations room with the letter, and the map, and the specific weight of a decision that did not feel like any decision he had made before. Not because it was harder, but because the thing it was in service of had changed. Every decision in this room for 11 years had been in service of the Empire. This one was in service of a woman reading a book she wasn't reading in a room with soft lights, and a sleeping boy who organized his crayons by a taxonomy only he understood. The Empire could look after itself for one morning. The Bakshan tea house was old. The kind of old that soul carries in its bones, the specific oldness of a city that had rebuilt itself multiple times over, and yet maintained these small pockets of continuity, low-roofed buildings, with wooden lattice screens and floors that remembered generations of people who had sat on them to have the kind of conversations that could not happen anywhere else. Kong arrived at 6:55. He came alone. He had not brought a weapon, and he had not brought Park, and he had not told Jessica exactly where he was going, only that he was going, and that he would come back. And she had looked at him from the kitchen table over her morning barley tea, and she had said nothing because she understood that saying nothing, in this specific context, was her telling him she trusted him, which was the most significant thing she had said in 11 days, and she said it without a word. Park Sung-yi was already there. He was seated at the low table nearest the wooden lattice screen, where the morning light came through in angled strips across the floor. He was younger looking in person than his photograph, 31 years of age, but carrying it with something that Kong recognized from looking in a mirror, the specific weathering that came from operating in dangerous spaces from a young age. He had his father's features, the Park family jawline, the careful eyes. But something around his mouth, something in the set of his shoulders, echoed the Uncle Kong had buried 6 years ago, and the recognition of it was uncomfortable in a way Kong had not anticipated. Family does that. You see it where you're not expecting it, and it rearranges things. Kong sat across from him. The tea house staff, old men who had staffed this room for decades, and had developed the specific skill of appearing both present and completely absent, had left a ceramic pot of tea between them and retreated to the far side of the building. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Kong poured tea for both of them. It was an old gesture, the kind his grandmother had demanded of him before he could reach the kitchen counter, the first social protocol installed in him before he'd known what social protocols were. He poured for the other person first. Even here, even now, Park Sung-yi watched him pour. Something moved in his face. My mother used to say your uncle did that, he said. Always poured for others before himself. Learned at the same place I did, Kong said. Same grandmother. They were quiet. Father doesn't know I'm here, Park Sung-yi said. He picked up his cup. His hands were steady. He doesn't know about yesterday either, not yet. What does he know? Knows there's a child. He knows the child is connected to you. He knows the child's mother is Black and American and has been living in your household for 4 years. He paused. He told me to watch and wait. He told me explicitly not to move. He looked at his cup. I moved anyway. Why? Park Sung-yi was quiet for a moment. The morning light through the lattice shifted slightly, a cloud moving, the city beginning its business outside the old building's walls. Because I was afraid, he said. The honesty of it landed without drama. Your consolidation of the Western districts last year put 3 of our operations into positions that required restructuring. My father absorbed it. He's patient, more patient than anyone I've ever known. But I watched him absorb it and I thought. He stopped. He set his cup down. I thought if you had a child, a legitimate heir, someone who would eventually consolidate your position further, the restructuring would be permanent. I thought acting early was smarter than waiting. You thought wrong, Kong said. His voice was even. Know that now. Park Sung-yi met his gaze steadily. I didn't know about the blood connection when I made the decision. I found out from my mother 2 days before yesterday, she called me, the way she calls me sometimes, with pieces of information she thinks I should have. She mentioned your uncle. She mentioned that you existed. She mentioned that she'd heard you had a child. He paused. She didn't know I'd already set things in motion. She was being a mother, sharing news, not intelligence. Kong looked at him for a long moment. Han Soo-jin, his aunt by marriage, a woman he had never met, calling her son to share family news, had accidentally connected 2 points in a map that had been operating in ignorance of each other. You stopped it, Kong said. Yesterday. After the clinic failed, you could have escalated. You had other options. You didn't use them. I stopped at the moment I confirmed the blood connection, Park Sung-yi said. I stopped it and I wrote the letter and I sent the messenger. Because whatever I am, whatever my father built me to be, he looked at the tea on the table. I don't make war on my family, even technical family, even once removed by marriage and separated by 30 years. He looked up. I made a mistake. I made it without full information, and I made it out of fear rather than strategy, and the consequences of it could have been. He stopped. His jaw tightened. Your son was in that car, Kong said. He was. Room was quiet. He's 4 years old, Kong said, not with anger, with the specific weight of a fact that needed to be said and fully heard by the person across the table. He goes to see a pulmonologist on Thursday mornings because his lungs have been borderline since he was 3 weeks old. He organizes his crayons by a system only he understands. He eats zucchini if it's cut the small way. He looked at Park Sung-yi steadily. He is 4 years old, and 3 days ago he was folded into a car footwell with his mother's body over his, while your men put rounds into the vehicle door. Sung-yi did not look away. He held it, the full weight of it. I know, he said. I know what I authorized. Then you understand why this conversation is the only reason you're still having conversations, Kong said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of mathematical precision, delivered without heat, and they both knew the difference. Yes, Park Sung-yi said. I understand. Kong picked up his tea. He drank it. He set the cup down. Your father, he said. He'll find out about this meeting. What does he do when he finds out? Park Sung-yi considered. He'll be angry that I acted without authorization. He'll be relieved this conversation is happening instead of the alternative. He paused. He's been managing the relationship between our organizations since before I was operational. He has never wanted a war with you. The friction of the last 2 years has been circumstantial, district pressure, operational overlap. It hasn't been personal. Is now, Kong said. Yes, Park Sung-yi said. Because of what I did, I know that. He looked at his cup. I'd like to propose a correction, not as a negotiation. As an acknowledgement of what my decision cost, and what it would have cost if yesterday's outcome had been different. Propose it. Park Sung-yi looked up. The Western District operations your consolidation disrupted. I'd like my father to restore the buffer arrangements that existed before last year's restructuring. A formal acknowledgement, through the proper channels, that the friction was circumstantial and not strategic. In exchange, he paused. In exchange, I'd like the opportunity to explain to my father what I did and why before he hears it from anyone else. And I'd like your word that the explanation will be the last of it. Kong looked at him. The morning light through the lattice moved again, slow and unhurried, the tea house indifferent to the weight of what was being arranged inside it. The buffer arrangements, Kong said. In writing, formally acknowledged. In writing, Park Sung-yi confirmed. Delivered within the week. Within 3 days. Kong was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the lattice screen, at the morning light coming through it. He thought about what Jessica had said. Be smarter than what was done to them. He thought about the operations room and the red markers and the blue markers and 12 men deployed to trace an abandoned sedan, and the alternative to this conversation that he had been fully prepared to execute before a letter arrived at his gate this morning. He thought about Minnie, asleep in the secured wing with his crayons on the desk, unaware that the architecture of his safety was being rebuilt in a tea house in Bukshan by 2 men who had almost become each other's ending. The buffer arrangements, Kong said. In writing, within 3 days, and Park Sung-yi. He met the younger man's eyes directly. The next decision you make that concerns my son, you come to me first. Through whatever channel necessary, you come to me first. Park Sung-yi held his gaze without flinching. Yes, he said. I understand. Kong stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the ceramic pot between them, still warm, enough tea left for both of them. He poured 2 more cups. He poured for the other person first. He left without looking back. He walked into the room as an enemy and left as something more complicated than that. 3 days for the buffer arrangements. 3 days for a war that almost happened to be formally prevented from ever finishing what it started. But there's still one conversation left, the most important one in this entire story. And it happens tonight. He came back to the estate at 9:45 in the morning. Jessica was in the kitchen when he arrived. She was at the counter with her barley tea, and the receipt she had been given from the pharmacy run Mrs. O had made that morning, going through the specifics of Minnie's updated medication schedule, the way she went through everything involving Minnie, completely, without shortcuts. Minnie was at the table beside her with his crayons and a fresh piece of paper, drawing something he had not yet named. Kong came through the kitchen door and he stopped. He looked at the 2 of them at the kitchen counter, and the table, morning light through the window, Mrs. O's broth beginning its early cycle, The smell of the house in the morning, the way he had learned to read it over 11 days of belonging to it in a different way than he had for the 11 years before. Jessica looked up. She read him, the way she always read him now, looking for the specific quality of his expression before the words arrived. What she found was not the cold precision of an operation completed. It was something quieter and less certain and more honest than that. Down, she said. Tell me, he sat. He told her. She listened to the whole account without interrupting, the tea house, the lattice light, the conversation that had not been the one either of them had been prepared to have, the buffer arrangement, the 3 days. She held her cup through all of it, and when he finished, she looked at the table for a moment, and then she looked at him. You poured his tea first, she said. Kong looked at her. Yes, she held his gaze. Something in her face settled, not surprise, not relief exactly, something that had been waiting to settle and had found its moment. Your grandmother taught you that, she said. Yes, mine too, she said quietly. My grandmother, different grandmother, same principle. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Between them, Minnie's crayon made its deliberate progress across the paper, his tongue pressed between his teeth, entirely unconcerned with whatever the adults were communicating over his head. Kong, she said. Quiet, just his name, he waited. Tonight, she said. We tell him tonight. Kong looked at Minnie, the round face, the crayon moving with such purpose, the tight natural coils catching the morning light from the window, the small body hunched with concentration over something only he could see the shape of yet. How, Kong said. The way you build ground, she said. The way I told you, in pieces he can carry at his pace. She set her cup down. He already knows you. He's already decided about you. You can see it in how he talks to you, how he shows you things. He's been deciding about you since the first morning with the crayons. She looked at Minnie. He just doesn't have the word for what he's decided yet. Tonight we give him the word. Kong looked at the boy. What if he won't, Jessica said. Not dismissively, with the certainty of a woman who had been Minnie's mother for 4 years and 4 months and knew the specific architecture of his trust. He's been building toward this question his whole life. He just needs it to be answered by the right people at the right time. She looked at Kong. Tonight is the right time. Kong nodded. His jaw was set and his hands were flat on the table, and there was something in his face that was not fear but occupied the same geography. The specific vulnerability of a man about to step into the most important room of his life without any of the tools he had spent 11 years building, because none of those tools worked here. Minnie looked up from his drawing. He looked at Kong. He looked at Jessica. He looked at Kong again. Are you sad? He said. Kong looked at him. No. Your face looks like the sad face, Minnie said, with the diagnostic precision of a child who had been reading the adults around him since he was old enough to look up. It's not sad, Kong said. It's something else. Minnie considered this. What is it? Kong looked at him for a long moment, the round face waiting with complete patience, the crayon still in his left hand, the drawing half finished on the paper before him. It's important, Kong said. There's a face that goes with important things. That's what you're seeing. Minnie thought about this. He nodded slowly, accepting the taxonomy. Okay, he said, and went back to his drawing. Jessica looked at her cup. The corner of her mouth moved very slightly in the direction of something that was not quite a smile but was closer to it than anything she'd produced in the last 48 hours. Tonight, she said again. Tonight, Kong confirmed. They told Yuna her outcome that afternoon. Park brought her to the small garden, not the meeting room, not the study. The garden, with the plum trees and the stone paths and the bench against the south wall, because what was going to be said deserved daylight rather than the institutional atmosphere of a corporate conversation. Kong sat on the bench. Yuna stood. It was deliberate, the deliberate reversal of every power dynamic they had operated within for 2 years. The engagement, the performance of compatibility, the strategic alliance that had never been about anything as simple as 2 people choosing each other. You gave me information, Kong said. It was accurate. It changed the shape of what would have happened. Yuna held his gaze. She was not wearing the dark, structured coat of last night. She was in something simpler. And the simplicity of it was its own kind of signal. She had stopped performing for him, which was possibly the most honest thing she had done in their entire acquaintance. Protection you're asking for, Kong said. Not from me. I have no interest in what happens to you, Yuna. That's the honest version. He watched her receive that without flinching. She had always been able to receive honesty better than most people. It was one of the things he had genuinely respected about her. What you're asking for is protection from the park organization, from the consequence of having given me information that weakened their position, she said. I spoke with Park Sung-yi this morning, Kong said. The arrangements we've made carry an implicit understanding that the information you provided becomes irrelevant. The situation it addressed has been managed through other means. Which means there's nothing for them to punish you for, because there's no longer a consequence of your information that they need to answer. Yuna absorbed this. Something in her posture shifted, the very specific release of a sustained tension, not dramatic, just the quiet mechanical easing of something that had been held too long. And from your side, you're being returned to your family, Kong said. The dissolution of the engagement stands. What you did with the clinic information, I'm not going to act on it. Not because you've earned that, but because acting on it would make things worse for my son, and nothing in my life takes priority over what's good for my son. He looked at her directly. Go home, Yuna. Don't involve yourself in anything connected to this household again. That's not a threat. It's the terms of the only outcome available to you. Yuna looked at him for a long moment. In the afternoon light, with the plum trees silver gray around the garden and the bench between them and the sound of the estate going about its business beyond the wall, she looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face in 2 years. Not the calculation, not the composure, not the strategic positioning. Something much simpler and much less comfortable. I was never right for you, she said, not sadly. As a fact, the same way she delivered most facts cleanly, without unnecessary weight around them. I knew that. I knew it from the beginning. The arrangement made sense on paper, and I told myself that was enough. Kong said nothing. She is, Yuna said, looking not at him but at the plum trees, the garden she had walked through as its presumptive mistress for 2 years, and was now standing in as a visitor being shown the door. She's right for you, in the way that actually matters, not strategically. In the way that changes who you are when you're with her. She looked back at him. That's an unusual thing. I'm not sure you know how unusual it is. Kong held her gaze. Go home, Yuna. She went. She walked through the garden without looking back, and the sound of her footsteps on the stone path faded into the estate's afternoon sounds, the gravel raking, the distant voice of a staff member, the ordinary texture of a house going about its life, and then she was gone. Kong sat on the bench for a long time afterward. He looked at the plum trees, the rough silver-gray bark, the late afternoon light finding the same quality it had found on the evening he had sat on this bench, and asked Jessica to tell him the truth, and she had looked at the bark of the same tree and told him yes. The world had a way of circling back, one conversation left, the most important one. Everything this story has been building toward, all 3 parts, all the kitchen mornings and the corridor conversations and the clinic steps and the gunfire and the tea house, has been building to one room, one evening, one question from a 4-year-old boy who has always known something without having the word for it. Stay with this story. Mrs. O made jade jiggy for dinner. Not a special occasion jade jiggy, exactly the same jade jiggy she made every 3rd evening, with the vegetables cut the way Minnie preferred, and the broth from the morning cycle, and the rice in the round white bowls that had been in her kitchen since she started working in this house. She made it ordinary on purpose, the way Mrs. O made most important things ordinary, because ordinary was where people felt safe enough to be honest, and tonight was going to require everyone to be very honest. She served it. She set the table, the round kitchen table, 4 chairs, 1 empty, and she poured the tea and she went to the far side of the kitchen, and she became very interested in the state of a counter that had not needed attention in some time. Minnie ate with his left hand. He talked about the drawing he had finished that morning, an elaboration of the house drawing, new version, with additional figures now that he had given it further thought. He explained the revisions with the careful attention of someone who takes their own creative decisions seriously. Kong received the explanation with full attention. Jessica drank her tea. Mrs. O wiped the counter. After dinner, while Minnie was at the sink performing his extended hand-washing ritual, Jessica looked at Kong across the table. He looked back. They did not need to say anything. The question of readiness was answered in the fact that they were both still sitting at the table rather than moving, both of them simply present in the moment before the moment. Minnie came back from the sink with wet forearms and announced he was ready for bed. In a little while, Jessica said. Come sit with us first. Minnie looked at her. He looked at Kong. He looked at the table, at the 2 adults sitting across from each other with the empty 4th chair between them and the specific quality of attention in both their faces that he had learned, over the last 11 days, to associate with things that were important. He climbed onto the empty chair. He sat with his hands in his lap, and he looked between them with the patient, waiting expression of a child who has understood that something is coming and has decided to give it room to arrive. Jessica looked at her son. She had rehearsed this in her mind 100 times across 4 years. She had imagined it at 2 in the morning with a sleeping infant, and in the pharmacy line, and in the estate corridor, and in the clinic waiting room, and in every version she had imagined, she had always known the right words. She had been preparing for this for so long that the preparation itself had become its own kind of delay, its own way of making the real thing feel less urgent than it was. She looked at her son and the preparation fell away entirely, and she simply said what was true. "You know how some families have a mama and a baba," she said. "And some families have just a mama or just a baba or a grandma and a grandpa or aunties, all different shapes." Minnie looked at her. "Yes, our family has been just us," she said. "You and me for a long time," Minnie said. "And Mrs. O." "Mrs. O," Jessica said. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to hide. "Yes, and Mrs. O." She looked at him steadily. "But there's something I need to tell you about our family. Something that's true that I should have told you before, and I'm going to tell you now." Minnie waited. "You have a baba," she said. Quiet and clear and without hesitation, because she had decided 4 years ago that when this moment came it would not be complicated with apology or explanation, just the fact of it, clean and clear so that Minnie could hold it without it being shaped by anyone else's feelings about it. "You have always had a baba. I just needed to find the right time to tell you." Minnie looked at her. His round face was very still. "Where is he?" he said. Jessica looked at Kong. Minnie turned and looked at Kong. Kong looked at his son across the kitchen table, the round face, the dark eyes, the tight natural coils, the left hand resting in his lap, the jaw that was his jaw in its younger and softer version. And he did the thing that had taken him 11 days and 4 years and 1 morning in a tea house in Buckshan and 31 years of being who he was to get to. He did the simplest possible thing. "Here," Kong said. "I'm right here." Minnie looked at him for a very long time. The kitchen was completely quiet. Mrs. O had stopped wiping the counter. The broth had finished its cycle. Outside the kitchen window, the evening was settling into the garden, the plum trees going silver gray in the fatting light, the stone paths catching the last warmth of the day. "My baba," Minnie said. Not a question. The specific declarative precision of a child whose mind has taken a piece of new information and placed it immediately and completely in the location where it was always supposed to go. "Yes," Kong said. Minnie looked at his mother. "Did you know?" she said. "I always knew." "Why didn't you tell me before?" Jessica held her son's gaze steadily. She had prepared for every version of this question. She had prepared for anger and confusion and tears. She had not prepared for the specific quality of Minnie's asking, not accusatory, not hurt, simply a child requesting information he was owed in a tone that communicated he was ready to receive the truth in whatever form it came. "Because I needed to make sure you were safe first," she said. "And I needed him to know you. And I needed you to know him a little bit, so that when I told you, you would already understand what kind of person he is." She paused. "Do you understand what kind of person he is?" Minnie looked at Kong. He looked at him for a long moment with the evaluative focus he brought to his crayon taxonomy and his zucchini negotiations and the fish in the clinic tank and everything else in his life that he took seriously enough to look at properly. "He fixes zippers," Minnie said. Something in Kong's chest did something it had never done before. Not broke, not opened, settled, like a thing that has been displaced for a very long time returning to the position it was always meant to occupy. "Yes," Jessica said very quietly. "He does." Minnie looked at Kong. "And he eats with his left hand," Kong said. His voice was level. "It costs something to keep it level." Minnie nodded. He looked at the table for a moment. He was processing. The thing about Minnie was that he processed with the same focused seriousness he brought to everything. The drawing, the crayons, the blue bear narrative, the fish tank, and so Kong and Jessica waited for him, the way you wait for someone who is doing real work without rushing it and without filling the silence with anything the silence didn't need. Then Minnie looked up. "I show you the new drawing," he said to Kong. "The one I finished this morning. I made it bigger." Kong looked at him. "Yes," he said. "I'd like to see it." Minnie slid off his chair. He went to the counter where he'd left the rolled drawing and he brought it back to the table and he unrolled it carefully with both hands and spread it flat. It was the house. The original house from the first morning, 4 walls, triangular roof, centered door, but larger now, the paper almost entirely covered. The 3 figures were there, the same as before. The one with close-cropped round hair on the left, the small one with circular coils in the middle, the tall one with the long hair and the lined face and the blue-hatched hands on the right. But Minnie had added something. Around the house, extending to the edges of the paper, he had drawn a wall, not a fence, a proper wall, the kind you couldn't see over, with a gate in the center that stood open. And beyond the open gate, rendered in careful blue crayon lines, a path leading outward. What's the path for? Kong said. Minnie pointed at the open gate. For going out, he said, and coming back. He pointed at the wall. The wall keeps the bad things outside. He pointed at the 3 figures inside it. And everybody stays in. Kong looked at the drawing for a long moment. The 3 figures inside the wall, the gate standing open. The path for going out and coming back. He looked at Jessica. She was looking at the drawing. Something was working in her face that she was not trying to contain. He looked at his son. It's a good wall, Kong said. Minnie nodded seriously. I know, he said. I worked on it for a long time. He worked on it for a long time. A 4-year-old drew the thing this story has been trying to say in every part, a wall to keep the danger out and a gate that stays open and 3 people inside it who belong there. Stay for the ending. 3 days later, the buffer arrangements arrived. A formal document, precisely worded, delivered through the park syndicate's official channels to Kong's legal representatives. The restoration of the operational boundaries that had existed before the previous year's friction, acknowledged as circumstantial, formalized in writing, signed by Park Min-chul himself. There was a handwritten line at the bottom, below the signatures, in older and more careful handwriting than Park Sung-yi's letter had been. The child is family, however distantly. Family is not leverage, Kong read the line. He folded the document. He gave it to Park and told him to file it in the permanent record. Then he went to find Jessica. She was in the garden. The back garden, on the wooden bench against the south wall that caught afternoon light until about 5 o'clock. She was reading, actually reading this time, the book open and her eyes moving across the page, and she looked up when she heard his footsteps on the stone path. He sat beside her, not at the far end. Beside her, the way you sit when you have stopped managing the distance between yourself and someone. It arrived, he said. I know, Mrs. O told me. She looked at the plum trees. Park Min-chul himself signed it. The line at the bottom. She was quiet for a moment. The garden moved around them, late afternoon light through the plum leaves, a bird somewhere in the branches, the distant, ordinary sounds of the estate. Your uncle, she said. Did he know what he was walking into when he married her? I don't think so, Kong said. I think he just loved her. She looked at him, he looked back. Want to ask you something, he said. She waited. Protected wing, he said. The secured room, the protocol on every departure. He paused. He looked at the garden, at the bench they were sitting on, at the plum trees that had been there longer than either of them and would be there after both of them. I want to change how we live in this house. Not the security stays, it has to stay. That's the reality of who I am and I'm not pretending otherwise. But the rooms. He looked at her. I want you to have the whole house, not a wing, not a protocol. The whole house the way it should have been from the first night you arrived. Jessica looked at him for a long moment. And Minnie, she said. Minnie has a father now, Kong said. His father's house is his house, all of it. He paused. If you'll let it be. She held his gaze. The afternoon light was coming through the plum trees and falling across both of them, warm and unhurried, the specific quality of late September light in a garden that had been keeping its own counsel about what happened between people on the bench against its south wall for longer than anyone could account for. I'll let it be, she said. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. They sat on the bench under the plum trees in the late afternoon light, and neither of them said anything for a while, because there was nothing left that needed saying that the garden didn't already know. The evenings changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small accumulations that constitute a life being rebuilt rather than simply lived. Mrs. O began cooking for 4 without being asked, setting the round kitchen table with 4 chairs and no empty one, adjusting the serving sizes with the instinctive calibration of a woman who had been reading a household for 6 years and had simply updated her reading. Minnie began bringing his drawings downstairs in the mornings, not to the kitchen counter, but to the round table, spreading them between the breakfast bowls for both adults to see before he explained them. The string lights in the secured room were moved to a different room, a larger room, one that had a bigger window and was on the south side of the estate where the morning light came in strong and clear. And Jessica arranged them above the window the same way she always had, because warmth was not a quality of rooms, it was a quality of things you carried from room to room. Kong came to breakfast. He came to dinner. He came to the bedtime routine, which remained Minnie's sovereign territory, throw arrangement and window negotiation and crayon migration and all of it. And he sat in the chair by the desk and gave the ritual the respect it deserved. After Minnie was asleep, he and Jessica sat in the corridor sometimes, in the 2 chairs at the small table that had been the site of their first evening conversations, Or they sat in the garden when the weather allowed, on the bench that had heard more truth than most of the rooms in the house. They talked. About Seongbukdong, both of their versions, filling in the hours the other hadn't been present for. About Atlanta and what she'd left behind and what she'd built instead. About the uncle he had loved quietly and buried without enough ceremony, and the woman the uncle had married who had turned out to be more connected to Kong's present than his past. About what the organization would look like in 10 years, and whether that was a life Minnie should inherit or be given the freedom to refuse. About the pulmonologist and the medication schedule, and whether they should look for a closer clinic now that the Mapo route had been operationally significant. About small things, what Minnie wanted for his birthday, which was in 6 weeks, and whether he should have a party or an outing, and what kind of party or outing, and whether Kong had any experience with children's birthday parties, which he did not, and whether that was something they needed to address as a matter of urgency, which Jessica gently indicated it was. They talk the way two people talk when they have been circling each other's full truth for 4 years and have finally, in the specific way that fear and proximity and one word completed across a corridor produce, stopped circling and started arriving. 3 weeks after the evening at the kitchen table, Minnie asked a question. He asked it in the morning, at the kitchen counter, while he was in the middle of his crayon taxonomy, and Kong was on the adjacent stool with his coffee, and Mrs. O was doing what she always did with the broth. "Are you going to be here forever?" Minnie said, not looking up from his crayons. The way he asked all the important things while doing something else as if the question was incidental rather than the point. Kong looked at him. "Yes," he said. Minnie moved a blue crayon to its position. "Even when I'm big, even when you're big, even when I'm as big as you." Kong looked at his son's round face, the tongue between the teeth, the focused, serious work of the taxonomy. "Especially then," he said. Minnie nodded. He put a yellow crayon in its place. "Okay," he said. "I thought so, I just wanted to make sure." He went back to his work. Jessica came in at 7:15 and found them on their stools at the counter. The large tattooed man and the small boy, both of them looking at the crayons. Both of them carrying the specific quality of people who have settled something important and are now simply present in the morning together. She poured her barley tea. She looked at the two of them. She looked at the drawing on the counter, a new one, still in progress, another house, another wall, the gate open, the path going out and coming back. She sat down. Mrs. O put the broth on. The smell of it, ginger root and dried anchovy and the kelp from the woman at the Noryangjan market who had been at the same stall for 30 years, moved through the lower floor of the house the way it always did. Consistent, continuous, unconcerned with the weight of everything that had happened in the rooms it passed through. The boy organized his crayons. The man drank his coffee. The woman drank her tea. Outside the kitchen window, the estate's garden moved in the early morning, the plum trees dripping from overnight rain, the stone paths dark and clean, the bench against the south wall catching the first light. The gate on the drawing on the counter stood open. Everyone was inside. He organized his crayons. She drank her tea. And the man who had been called the most feared in Seoul sat on a prep stool beside his son and learned the taxonomy of blue. This is the end of the boy they called nobody, but not the end of what it built. Thank you for watching every part of this story. If you watched all the way through, subscribe to Afro Soul Romance TV and ring the notification bell, because there are more stories where this one came from, and they will find you if you let them.